Welcome, settle in for another great story. Let's start. I stood in the dimly lit security office of Blackthorn Trust, staring at the bank of monitors. 20 years as a night guard here, and I'd never felt this uneasy. The polished granite floors and brass fixtures of the bank's interior, usually so familiar, now seemed to twist and warp under the pale glow of the emergency lights. My fingers tapped nervously against the metal desk, the rhythm matching the quickening beat of my heart. Something was wrong tonight. The usual nighttime sounds, the hum of the HVAC system, the occasional creak of settling pipes had taken on a sinister edge. Each noise carried an undertone I couldn't place, like whispers just beyond hearing. My eyes flicked to camera 5, where a shadow seemed to flicker across the screen. I leaned closer, adjusting my tie, which suddenly felt like a noose. The basement vault corridor appeared empty, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Blackthorn Trust had recently upgraded its security system after a series of inexplicable break-ins across the city. No forced entry, no alarms triggered, just empty vaults and guards with missing memories. The media dubbed it the Phantom Heist, and the police were no closer to solving it. I cycled through the camera feeds, methodically checking each angle. Everything looked normal, too normal. The vault door remained sealed, its imposing frame a testament to human ingenuity. The motion sensors showed no activity, and the temperature readings were steady. Then I noticed it. The timestamp on camera 5 was frozen. My breath hitched. I reached for my radio, but before I could call it in, the overhead lights flickered once, twice. The air grew thick with static, making my teeth ache. The monitors blinked in unison, and for a split second I saw something impossible on every screen. A figure standing directly behind my reflection, wearing a mask so dark it seemed to devour the light. I spun around, my heart pounding. The office was empty, but the air felt heavier, charged with an electric tension. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, casting long, shifting shadows. The radio crackled to life, spitting out fragments of words: breach, vault, impossible, then silence, absolute and suffocating. I knew I should call for backup, follow protocol, wait for support. But 20 years of routine had taught me every inch of this building. If someone was attempting another phantom heist, I had to act. I drew my weapon, its familiar weight offering little comfort as I stepped into the corridor. The emergency lights cast a sickly glow, making the shadows dance. Each step echoed too loudly, despite my attempts at stealth. The vault was 3 floors down, past a labyrinth of offices and security checkpoints. All I had to do was make it there and assess the situation. But as I approached the stairwell, a sound stopped me, the soft click of dress shoes on granite, moving with deliberate precision, and they were coming from behind me. The stairwell door felt heavier than usual as I pulled it open, my palms slick with sweat. The footsteps quickened, but when I turned, the corridor was empty, only the pulsing amber lights creating pools of shadow that seemed to breathe. My training screamed at me to wait for backup, but something primal urged me forward. The stairs spiraled down into darkness, each level marked by red exit signs that cast bloody shadows on the walls. The air grew colder as I descended, carrying a metallic tang that coated my tongue. Second floor, first floor, basement level 1. The security pad by the basement door blinked green without me swiping my card. Impossible, these doors required biometric confirmation, yet it swung open silently, inviting me into the vault corridor. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. My breath came in visible puffs, though the building's climate control should have prevented this. The vault corridor stretched before me, its walls lined with safety deposit boxes that seemed to watch me pass. A whisper echoed through the hall, words just below the threshold of understanding. I pressed myself against the wall, gun raised, listening. The sound came again, closer this time, like someone reciting numbers in reverse. The emergency lights began to flicker in sequence, creating a strobe effect that fractured the corridor into frozen moments. In one flash, I saw a figure at the far end, their suit as black as spilled ink. In the next, they were halfway down the hall. Another flash, gone completely. My radio burst to life, found something in the old records vault, 1982 incident. Get out now. The message dissolved into static, but movement caught my eye. The vault door, all 30 tons of reinforced steel, was opening. No alarms, no warnings, just the impossible sight of the most secure door in the city swinging wide like it was made of paper. Inside, darkness rippled like something alive. The vault's interior lights sparked and died, leaving only the emergency strips to illuminate what should have been impossible. The safety deposit boxes were open, their contents scattered across the floor. But it wasn't money or jewels, just hundreds of old photographs, all showing the same thing: a figure in a black suit standing behind unsuspecting people, wearing that light-absorbing mask. The temperature plummeted further. Frost crystals formed on the walls, creating patterns that looked disturbingly like faces. The photographs began to move, sliding across the floor as if pulled by invisible hands, arranging themselves into a spiral pattern. I stepped backward, my training warring with terror. The logical part of my mind searched for explanations, hidden projectors, advanced technology, elaborate misdirection. But as I watched, the photographs began to burn, not with normal fire, but with black flames that consumed the images from the edges inward. The last photo to burn showed the bank's exterior, dated 1982. In it, a security guard stood at attention, wearing my exact uniform. Behind him, barely visible in the window's reflection, was the masked figure. The guard in the photo was my father. The revelation hit me like a physical blow, sending me staggering back into the corridor. The vault door began to close, its mechanism silent and smooth. But before it sealed completely, I heard a laugh that sounded like breaking glass and words that turned my blood to ice, like father, like son. The vault corridor had become a maze of shifting shadows and distorted reflections. Every surface seemed to mirror something slightly wrong, a hand movement that didn't match mine, a silhouette that stood while I crouched. The emergency lights created a strobing effect that made reality feel fragmented, broken into snapshots of nightmare logic. My father had disappeared during his shift 43 years ago, leaving behind only his badge and a cryptic note about them coming through the mirrors. The case was classified as desertion, his reputation ruined. I'd spent my career trying to restore honor to our name, never believing his wild stories about figures in the dark until now. The temperature continued to drop. Ice crystals formed patterns on the walls, not random formations, but precise geometric shapes that seemed to form and reform into words I couldn't quite read. My breath came out in thick white clouds that lingered too long in the air, twisting into shapes that mimicked human forms before dissipating. A sound drew my attention, the soft click of a safety deposit box opening, then another and another. The noise spread like a wave down the corridor, boxes popping open in sequence. From each one, old photographs spilled out, drifting to the floor like dead leaves. I moved forward, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't explain. The photos all showed similar scenes, moments frozen in time where the masked figure lurked in reflections, standing behind people who had no idea they were being watched. Some photos dated back to the bank's founding in 1924. In every era, the figure remained unchanged. The radio on my hip spat static, then cleared. They're not thieves, they're collectors. They take more than money. My father's voice, decades younger. Movement reflected in the polished floor tiles, a suit darker than shadow, a mask that seemed to pull in light. I spun, gun raised, but the corridor behind me was empty. The reflection remained, moving independently, reaching toward me with fingers that stretched too long, too sharp. The emergency lights suddenly intensified, burning like miniature suns. Every reflective surface in the corridor, the floor, the metal deposit boxes, the chrome fixtures, showed the same image. The masked figure standing directly behind me, close enough to touch. I felt its breath on my neck, cold as a vacuum. "We've been waiting for you," it whispered, its voice like rustling papers. "Your father was clever, figured out our pattern, but he asked too many questions, looked too deeply into things meant to stay hidden, like father, like son." I tried to turn, but my body wouldn't respond. In the reflections, I watched helplessly as the figure raised its hand, fingers elongating into impossible shapes. The air itself seemed to crack, revealing darkness between the fragments of reality. "The night shift is such a lonely post," it continued. "So many hours to think, to wonder, to question. Your father questioned too much, and now so have you." The photos on the floor began to blacken and curl, not burning, but aging decades in seconds. The images changed as they degraded, the masked figure growing closer to its victims in each shot, reaching, taking. In the last photograph, I recognized my father's face, frozen in a moment of realization as dark hands reached for him from every reflection. The same hands now reaching for me. The darkness between reflections opened like a wound in reality. Through it, I glimpsed impossible geometries, a space where light bent wrong and shadows had weight. The masked figure's grip tightened, its fingers cold as grave dirt against my shoulder. "Your father lasted longer than most," it said, its voice rippling like distorted water. "He almost understood the truth about us, about the bank, about why it was built here." The walls seemed to pulse, deposit boxes sliding open and closed in rhythmic waves. Each one revealed not valuables, but memories frozen in silver nitrate photographs, spanning a century of surveillance. The masked figures had always been there, watching, waiting, collecting. My radio crackled again, my father's voice stronger. "The bank isn't just a bank, it's a door. They built it as a door." Understanding crashed through my mind like breaking glass. Every reflection showed a different angle of the truth. The bank's architecture formed precise geometric patterns. The vault's position marked the center of something vast and mathematical. The building itself was a key, designed to unlock spaces between spaces. We've been patient, the figure continued, other shapes emerging from the mirrors now, each wearing masks that denied light. Gathering fragments of human experience, one reflection at a time. Your father's collection was particularly interesting, and now so is yours. I fought against the paralysis, decades of training warring with primordial terror. The figure's grip weakened for just a moment, surprise or amusement, I couldn't tell, but it was enough. I threw myself forward, rolling across the ice-slick floor. The photographs exploded upward, swirling in a tornado of frozen moments. Through this storm of images, I saw my father's last day from dozens of angles, his discovery, his resistance, his final understanding. The masked figure hadn't taken him. He'd gone willingly, choosing to step through the spaces between reflections rather than let them take someone else. My back hit the wall and I felt the cold bite of metal, the fire alarm. Without hesitation, I pulled it. Sprinklers erupted overhead, water cascading down in sheets. Each droplet became a tiny mirror, thousands of reflections fragmenting reality into a kaleidoscope of truth. The masked figures distorted, their forms splitting and multiplying in the spray. Clever, the first figure said, its voice now coming from everywhere and nowhere, like him. But water only multiplies our paths, gives us more ways in, more reflections to step through. The emergency light strobed through the water, creating split-second tableaus of horror. The figures were closing in, their masks beginning to crack, revealing what lay beneath, geometries that hurt to comprehend, depths that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. I had one chance. My father's last message hadn't been a warning, it was instructions. The water turned to steam where the figure stepped, creating a fog bank that twisted with impossible colors. Through the mist, their masks began to crack further, revealing fragments of spaces that existed between moments, between thoughts. My father's final words played through my mind. The reflections aren't their strength, they're their prison. Break the pattern, break their path. I understood now, the bank's design, the vault's position, the precise arrangement of reflective surfaces, all created a geometric pattern that allowed them to step through. But patterns could be disrupted, mathematics could be broken. With trembling fingers, I reached for my badge, the same model my father had worn, polished to a mirror shine. The figures paused, recognizing the object, remembering another night 43 years ago. You only join him, the first figure said, its mask now more void than substance. Beyond the reflection, beyond time, part of our collection. No, I replied, understanding flooding through me. He wasn't collected, he became the collector. I threw my badge into the center of the corridor. It spun through the air, catching emergency light and water droplets, creating a disk of pure reflection. The figures reached for it instinctively, their forms distorting as they tried to step through its spinning surface. The badge hit the floor with a sound like reality cracking. The reflective pattern shattered, decades of carefully maintained geometry broken by a single point of chaos. The figures screamed, the sound like mirrors breaking played backward. Steam turned to ice turned to shadow, and shadow turned to something else entirely. Through the fragmenting reality, I saw other spaces, other times, and in one of them my father stood watching, his own badge in hand, a sad smile on his face. "I'm sorry," he mouthed silently. "I had to know, had to stop them, had to wait for you." The figures began to implode, their forms collapsing as the pattern that anchored them dissolved. They reached for me with desperate, elongating fingers, but their strength was broken. One by one, they folded into themselves, pulled into the spaces between reflections, but this time sealed away. The last figure's mask crumbled completely, revealing a face that shifted between my father's and my own. "Patterns always reform," it said, its voice fatting. "Reflections always return. Time is the ultimate circle." Then it was gone, leaving me alone in the corridor. The sprinklers sputtered and died, the emergency lights stabilized. The photographs on the floor turned to dust, then vanished completely. My radio crackled one final time. "The night shift is yours now. Watch the reflections, maintain the pattern, but remember, sometimes the only way to protect others is to become what they fear." I picked up my badge, its surface now dull and non-reflective. The night shift would never be the same, but as I stood in the vault corridor, watching the emergency lights create familiar shadows, I understood my role. Not just a guard of material wealth, but a watcher of the spaces between spaces. After all, every reflection tells a story, and some stories need to be kept in the dark.